getting back to to the cars now, you've had a number of cars. One of them, I believe, was a British built 1979 Ensign N179, which I have no idea what that looks like, and a 1980 Ferrari, which of course I'm more familiar with. But what's your favorite and what are you racing these days?
Well, and I added to the stable a 1982 Williams. It was the championship car for Keke Rosberg. Um, his son, Nico Rosberg, went on to become champion with Mercedes in the current Formula One. I don't know, back maybe 2019 or something like that, 2018, somewhere in there. So I've had those three historic Formula One cars. The Ensign is like a dot point in history. It failed to qualify more than three-quarters of the time. That was in the era where there were more spots than more cars than spots on the grid. So like the Indy 500 today, right? Um, in the one quarter of the time that it did qualify, it failed to finish all but once.
Yeah.
For some sort of breakdown or crash or whatever.
So was that a used car salesman that sold you this thing? Or
I want this car.
I said we only used for weekends or something. And the one time that it did finish, it finished out of the points. So it's this little dot point in history, but I have about a 40% podium rate in that car because we did a little bit of re-engineering to improve reliability and handling performance. And the engine and gearbox was pretty standard across most of the F1 cars in the 70s and 80s. So that's all standard. So it's just going to be about the driver and the handling in the car. And yeah, so I've done pretty well in that car. We call it Cinderella because it gets no respect. Everybody wants to take pictures and sit in the Ferrari and hear about it, and nobody cares about the Ensign. So she's Cinderella.
There you go.
Funny.
One shoe can change your whole life.
But I did. I have this. Yeah, I have this more modern, still vintage because they were out of currency cars. I raced with the Ferrari factory for about 15 years, and most of that time was in a 2003 Formula One car that was ex-Rubens Barrichello. He was Michael Schumacher's teammate. And we would drive, I can't say race, we would drive as Ferrari's international demonstration team. And we'd go to, 6, 8, 10 countries a year, they sell tickets, people would show up, Ferrari would get a little uplift from the brand, they'd sell a lot of merchandise, sell a lot of cars, all that kind of stuff. We had that car in North America 7 times, and I broke the outright track record of 6 of the 7 tracks. So it got tons of uplift from that. And that was, when you asked about my favorite, I mean, anything that's going to break track records has got to be a favorite.
I'm very sad to hear that 2003 was vintage. I feel like that's like yesterday. I just want to make that comment.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually went to the Monaco Grand Prix in 2001 and was privileged to be in the tower there where you get to watch the race, drinking champagne the whole time. It was amazing. But that's now vintage. It's and Michael Schumacher, by the way, won that race.
Yes.
In a Ferrari. They were dominant at the time. But with those cars, modern F1 racers and those cars, what is the real difference between them? And what are the challenges associated with driving the old ones rather than the new ones?
So we've got 3 eras, right? We've got the 70s, 80s. We've got my 03, which is a very different car than either end of the spectrum. The old cars, H-pattern gearbox, 3 pedals, gas, brake, and clutch. Shift as you would driving a manual transmission Jeep. And that's all there is to it. The 03 had lots of driver's aids. In that era, there was traction control, which meant that I could hammer it coming out of the corner, even before I was completely coming out of the corner. And the traction control would ensure that there was never enough power that the rear would start to slide. And it moderated all that. So our driving technique was either full brake or full gas, almost nothing in between, unless it was a, big sweeper or something like that. Very different driving style than where you have to modulate the throttle. Modern F1 cars, you do have to modulate the throttle because they've got almost, it's debatable, it depends on what you read, but let's say close to 900 horsepower, an electric boost. And if you get on that throttle too hard because they're turbocharged, you are going to spin the tires. And they have to be careful about that. They don't have anything else that helps with any handling. So they can make a ton of adjustments. If you've seen a Formula One steering wheel, there's 20 dials and switches and all that. And I had that on my 03 car as well. There was lots of stuff that was adjustable in this car. You could literally you can't do this while you're driving unless you're Schumacher, but you can dial up the track map. And if you decide that there's some debris in one corner and you want your traction control to be stepped up a couple of notches because it's slippery and you want to make sure that it compensates for that, you pull up the track map, dial the corner, set the switches, hit a button and program it. And then every time you got to that spot in the track, those elements of the steering wheel would automatically adjust for that corner.
And you have to do that as a driver. It can't be done for you remotely. Even though they've got tons of instrumentation, they can't control anything in the car, right?
That sounds like a lot to do.
Yeah, at one point there was two-way telemetry, and they could actually come back and remap the car, the engine, and all that sort of stuff, but that was banned because it just was it's taking the driver out of the equation too much. So modern cars, it is a lot about the driver, but there's so much driver equality right now. If you take a driver that's in a really lousy car at the back of the grid and put them into a front-running car, they're going to run very well. And that happened a couple of years ago when George Russell, who was racing for Williams, that was one of the back markers, took over for Lewis Hamilton, who I think had COVID. And he got into Hamilton's car and was like second in the race or something like that. He was just phenomenal. Whereas he was just lost racing Miss Williams that couldn't show his potential.
Is that that's a function of the engineering of the car?
It is. And the cars are very close. I mean, top to bottom on the Formula One grid is maybe a second and a half in a lot of races in qualifying. And so that's pretty close when you can still, minute and a half to 2 minute lap. That's, percentage wise, it's pretty close.